Well, the U.S. President, Donald Trump, he is addressing the media over the recent domestic and international developments. Let's listen in to what the U.S. President is saying.
Although not to Zelensky, he wasn't.
Well, you know what, that's another
But to Trump, he's been good.
Yeah.
Go ahead, bro.
Nice tie, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. I like yours, too.
Two questions. One on peace. Why don't you think any other European countries are offering a peace deal? It seems like no one's come to the table for peace except for you.
Yeah. It's a very good question. Sometimes questions aren't answerable. They're in a very unusual position. They don't know how to end the war. I think I do know how to end the war. Despite the Russia hoax, I've always had a good relationship with Putin. And, you know, he wants to end the war. He wants to end it. And I think he's going to be more generous than he has to be. And that's pretty good. That means a lot of good things. Because frankly, you could have made a great deal if this war never started, you could have made a great deal. I don't know that anything would have had to be given up. This was not a war that was going to start, Brian. And it didn't start. For 4 years, somebody said, well, how do we know that? Well, for 4 years, it didn't start. I used to speak to Vladimir about it. I used to speak to him about it at length. It was the apple of his eye, but there was no way he was going in. And he knew, there were going to be consequences. But it did start. I mean, think of what happened. Inflation, you have the war with Ukraine and Russia, that wouldn't have happened. October 7th would have never happened. Israel, they had no money. Iran had no money. Iran was stone cold broke, and now they have a lot of money. And that's going to be the next thing you'll be talking about is Iran. What's going to happen with Iran? And there'll be some interesting days ahead. That's all I can tell you. You know, we're down to final strokes with Iran. That's going to be an interesting time. And we'll see what happens. But we're down to the final moments. We're at final moments. You can't let them have a nuclear weapon. I think that I would have had a deal within 1 month after the rigged election of 2020. They were all set to make a deal. And then when I lost, they saw this person who's a stupid person, very stupid person. And they said, let's not make a deal. And they were right. He took the sanctions off. They became rich under Biden. They went from having no money to having $300 billion. All in a short period. It's oil. Oil builds up fast. It's a nice living if you have a nice oil well. And they do. They have a lot of nice oil wells, right? So anyway, it's going to be a big thing. It's an interesting time in the history of the world. But we have a situation with Iran that something's going to happen very soon. Very, very soon. You'll be talking about that pretty soon, I guess. And hopefully we can have a peace deal. You know, I'm not speaking out of strength or weakness. I'm just saying I'd rather see a peace deal than the other. But the other will solve the problem.
Mr. President, your allies are calling on you to pardon Derek Chauvin. Are you considering pardoning Derek Chauvin?
No, I haven't even heard about it. No.
Mr. President, on peace.
I haven't heard that.
In the first term, you may recall, I broke the news that you were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And the reason for that was the work that you led on the Abraham Accords. I spoke yesterday with the member of parliament, the Norwegian parliament, that nominated you. And he said what the Nobel Committee is looking for from you, Mr. President, is security guarantees for Ukraine. Is that a possibility, Mr. President?
So before I even think about that, I want to settle the war, get it finished. Because if I'm not here, nobody's going to settle it. And President Macron has said that, and everybody said that, the prime ministers and presidents. We're pushing very hard. That's all I'm thinking about now. As far as the question about security later, that's the easy part. The hard part is getting it settled. We got to get them. We're losing 2,000 human beings every week. More than that, actually. 2,000 nice, young, although they're getting older because they're drafting much older now. In the case of one country, much older, because a lot of the young people have been killed. It's very sad, and I'd like to see if I could stop that. And I'd like to also see if we could stop making these massive payments from the United States. I mean, Biden gave away money like it was water, with no anything, got nothing for it. Europe did it in the form of a loan. They get their money back, we don't. So.
All right, the U.S. president there speaking with the media, where he suggested that Ukraine doesn't want to settle and that this war, and that Vladimir Putin, he wants to end that war, and he suggests that he will be more generous than Vladimir Zelensky in this particular concern. Meanwhile, he had made a surprising move, threatening Russia with sanctions just days after reaching out to the country. In fact, this comes on the same day that he reached out to Iran to negotiate a deal. Trump, in fact, warned that if a deal to end the war in Ukraine isn't reached soon, he'll impose high levels of taxes, tariffs, and sanctions on Russia, which could potentially cripple its banking sector. In fact, my colleague Nick Harper gets us more details.
Well, I think there has been some signalling from Washington over the course of the last week that it seems to be moving in this position, that it seems to be perhaps strengthening its position against Russia. I'll come to that in a minute, but certainly it is a big change, because what we have seen over the last few weeks is a real pressure campaign against Ukraine to get them to the negotiating table, to get them to agree to that rare earths mineral deal, while at the same time there seemed to be much warmer relations between Russia. There was, of course, the meeting in Saudi Arabia between the US and Russia, from which Ukraine and European allies was excluded. We were told that that was largely to try and normalise relations between the US and Russia, something that we certainly didn't see under the previous US President Joe Biden, who effectively gave Russia the cold shoulder, tried to create it, make it an international pariah on the world stage. But I guess what we have seen over the last week is a certain movement and strengthening of language coming out of the White House, coming out of the Trump administration, about potential pushback towards Russia. Just on Thursday, during a speech in New York, the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, was talking about the possibility of increasing sanctions against Russia. He said that Joe Biden's sanctions had been egregiously weak, and he said that he was looking at potentially providing leverage in peace negotiations and therefore putting more sanctions in place. Off the back of that, we're now seeing Donald Trump talking about this real possibility of trying to get Russia on side, get Russia to the negotiating table. And as he said in that Truth Social post, this is all about trying to get a final settlement agreement on peace, telling both Russia and Ukraine to get to the table right now. Of course, there are plenty of sanctions, thousands already in place on Russia. So it's really about how the US can now find leverage to try and push Russia to the negotiating table with possible extra sanctions on top of what is already in place.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump is making headlines again, this time for reaching out to Tehran and expressing his desire to make a deal with Iran. Reports suggest that Trump has written to Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei in an effort to establish communication and potentially negotiate a deal. Meanwhile, in the latest, Iran has said that it will not enter any direct negotiations with the United States, and also added that it is yet to receive any letter from the US government.
You wrote a letter to the Khomeini,
Yes.
the leader? When did you send the letter?
Yesterday.
And you said you better negotiate, or we want you to
I didn't
negotiate?
say you better. I said,
Okay.
I hope you're going to negotiate, because it's going to be a lot better for Iran. And I think they want to get that letter. The other alternative is we have to do something, because you can't let them have a nuclear weapon.
See, classic diplomatic response, because both sides are trying to browbeat each other, put more pressure on each other. Trump first started off with sanctions, more sanctions, also spoke about maximum pressure on Iran or maximum sanctions on Iran. Yesterday, one of the ministers in the US administration also spoke about that how US intends to cripple Iran's oil economy. And today, Trump says that he has also written a letter to Mr. Khamenei to go for mediation, to talk about the nuclear program. But today now, Iran knows that since US is approaching out in the open, admitting that they have written a letter to Mr. Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, the foreign minister who is in Jeddah to attend the OIC meet, clearly says that we have not received any letter, But what is the underlying tone there is that if you put maximum pressure on us, you can't talk both. You can't sort of pressurize us with sanctions and then bring us on negotiation table. That is not going to happen. You want to talk to us directly, but not by pressurizing or sort of putting pressure on us through the sanctions route. So it very much looks like that both sides will be talking, but perhaps through the intervention or involvement or engagement of a mediator. And that is where the Russia's role come in, because we have received reports from the Western media that how US has been in talks with Russia to hold a meet with Iran as well, to bring them on their side, to bring them on the table for negotiation on the nuclear deal. And throughout last 1 month, since Mr. Trump has got into the office of the president, he has been giving mixed signals on every issue, be it the issue of tariffs. He first announces it, then rolls back it. He started off by saying Iran is a lovely country. We don't want them to have a nuclear power program, but we also want Iran to be in our good books or have good relations with Iran. And then he goes on, announces sanctions on Iran, then announces a letter that he has been writing to, he has sent to Mr. Khamenei. So I think this process will go on for a while until we see the same kind of talks which US has now got Ukraine into. Perhaps in a similar way, US will push Iran further to adopt this policy or adopt its invite for talks on nuclear program.
The West Bengal Governor Dr. C.V. Ananda Bose called an emergency meeting with Vice Chancellors following a detailed report on the clashes at Jadavpur University. The meeting comes after a chaotic incident where Bengal Education Minister Bratya Basu was heckled by protesting students, resulting in damage to his car and injuries to himself and others.
Some of the Vice Chancellors pointed out there is a growing incidence of substance abuse in the universities, which is also leading to conflicts and violence. That's some area where action has to be taken, proactive action has to be taken. Then conflict resolution and mediation. The teaching community, the non-teaching community within the campus, the parents, they have to join together for this purpose, that is conflict resolution and mediation. So mobile apps for emergency reporting should be encouraged. Artificial intelligence powered, utilize the all AI powered tools to monitor social media, online forums, other digital platforms for potential threats.
Time for a very short break. More news and updates on the other side. Welcome back. In a major update, the US Supreme Court rejected Rana's plea to halt his extradition to India. The 26/11 Mumbai attacks accused linked to Lashkar-e-Toiba now faces trial in India after President Trump approved his transfer last month. Indian authorities are finalizing logistics, marking a key step towards justice for the 2008 terror victims. Rana had made a final plea before the US Chief Justice.
Rana's emergency plea seeking stay in extradition was rejected by the US Supreme Court. He had made several attempts to avoid extradition to India, but all have failed. US President Donald Trump had earlier approved his extradition after courts in US rejected all his petitions. Rana is a key accused in 26/11 terror attack case and was named by his associate David Headley. Rana will be the first high-profile accused who will be tried in connection to 26/11 case in India. Rana's extradition and subsequent questioning in India will help agencies here unearth the larger conspiracy involvement of Pakistan in 26/11 and unearth deeper terror networks. They'll ensure accountability and also help understand other planners, financiers, handlers connected to the case. Terrorists like Hafiz Saeed, Zakirul Rahman Lakwi have been named in the charge sheet, and their whereabouts and whether any of the terrorists are being shielded by Pakistan will perhaps be clear during his questioning. We know for a fact that Ajmal Kasab, the lone terrorist, was caught alive and was hanged in 2012. Abu Jindal's trial is stalled. So Rana's extradition is very important in the case. As per agencies, Rana had facilitated Headley's travel to Mumbai. Headley's a key conspirator in the case. Rana had opened consultancy immigration center in Mumbai, gave cover to Headley to stay in India. He was in constant touch with Headley, was instrumental in providing logistics for the attack. Charge sheet of the Mumbai police also mentions Rana's presence in Mumbai just ahead of 26/11 attacks as well. India has gathered evidence to prove Rana's active role in terror attacks, and his arrest by Indian agencies will bring a form of closure and relief to survivors of 26/11, those who lost their lives in the tragic attacks as well.
India has expressed deep concern over a security breach during External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar's recent visit to London, where UK-based separatist and extremist elements disrupted proceedings. In a strong statement, India criticized the leniency shown to such groups and the apparent indifference to their threats, which New Delhi says obstruct its legitimate diplomatic efforts. While acknowledging the UK Foreign Office's condemnation of this incident, India warns that it will judge the UK's sincerity based on concrete action against the culprits, not just words, especially given past incidents.
I would like to again reiterate that we have conveyed our deep concern to the UK authorities about the breach of security arrangements by UK-based separatist and extremist elements during External Affairs Minister's visit. There is a larger context to the incident, and it's important to understand that. It brings out both the license accorded to such forces as well as indifference to their intimidation, threats and other actions aimed at impeding our legitimate diplomatic activities in the UK. While we have noted the statement issued by the UK Foreign Office on the matter, our view of its sincerity would depend on the action taken against culprits on this and previous occasions.
In September 2019, Khalistani and Pakistani diaspora elements attacked the Indian High Commission in London, prompting India to raise security concerns with the UK, which responded with promises of better protection but limited concrete action. In March 19, 2023, Khalistani protesters vandalized the Indian High Commission, pulling down the national flag. India summoned UK's Deputy High Commissioner to protest the security lapse. While the UK condemned the act as unacceptable, they did arrest one suspect. In October 2023, Khalistani supporters blocked India's High Commissioner from entering a Gurdwara in Glasgow. India expressed frustration over recurring disruptions. The United Kingdom reiterated their commitment to diplomatic safety, but again without detailing specific measures. In January this year, alleged Khalistani supporters disrupted screenings of the film Emergency in UK theatres. India urged the UK to hold those responsible accountable, with the UK yet to outline a clear response beyond general assurances. On the 6th of March, just a couple of days back, a Khalistani protester breached security during the External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar's visit to London. India conveyed deep concern over extremist actions, while the UK's Metropolitan Police intercepted the individual but have made no arrests. So attacks, vandalism, Indian complaints, the UK responds, but it still goes back.